If you're the top executive in a fast growing firm, you're likely feeling the stress of the role. And that stress is natural, but it's not a requirement. There's lots of different ways that you can become more effective and efficient. And that's why today the subject for the leaders list is going to be executive enablement. And we're going to discuss this with the founder and leader of the Chief of Staff Roundtable, Phil Burns. We'll talk about what executive enablement means. We'll talk about what could be right for you and then how to get the most out of that solution. My name is Bryon Morrison, and let's get into the leaders list.
Okay, Phil Burns, welcome to the leaders list.
So glad to be here, Bryon. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. So today's subject, we're going to talk about executive enablement. I know that you've seen that from several different angles, but it's a term that I hear coming up a lot. Organizations and leaders are trying to understand, like, how can they be more? How can they, save time? How can they be more effective with the time that they have? And I think all of that is part of it. But I know you've got a real passion for this subject. And so as the head of the Chief of Staff Roundtable, I'd love to hear your perspective on how you would define executive enablement, what it means to you.
Yeah, I'd love to share, Bryon. As you said, I'm super passionate about this subject because I've seen firsthand what really bad leadership looks like and what really good leadership looks like. And the key variable that I've discovered in my work with leaders over the last 15, 20 years is how much support they have around them that they've taken the initiative to install, right? And so when I think of executive enablement, I think of it's the support layer around a leader to help them be the best leader they can be. And it's really as simple as that. And so that support layer can take the form of actual individuals in roles that can help them, define and execute what really matters most for their vision and their organization. Or there could be a digital tool or a resource that could be augmented with individuals to help do that. That's typically the spectrum of the enablement function that exists around a leader that I've seen in my experience. And the best leaders use some combination of those two resources, individuals helping them achieve what they want to achieve, but also having technology to help either augment or replace that individual human component.
Yeah, that's a great point, that it can be a software solution. It can be an individual who's actually working with them. I think it could also even be cohorts for those executives. It's where they gain information that helps them be a better leader and then handle some of the tasks that are important. Can you give me a few examples of how you've actually previously supported executives and then been a part of those day-to-day operations?
Totally. So I've really spanned. I've served in a lot of different roles throughout my career in an executive enablement capacity. I've been an administrative assistant all the way up to a chief of staff, which is typically the highest. I don't want to say highest rank, but the most preeminent position in an executive enablement function around a leader. And so I've really seen the whole spectrum of different functions and activities that exist in this executive enablement layer around a leader. And I would say my experience as a chief of staff has spanned really the last 6 years. I've been helping leaders my whole career, but I didn't officially get into this chief of staff role until about 6 years ago when I helped a brand new CEO basically really install himself as a true transformational leader in an organization that, it was his first time being a CEO. He never had a chief of staff before, had worked with them in the past, knew how much of a strategic lever they can be for them to achieve the goals that they have for an organization. And so what I've learned being explicitly in this chief of staff profession and space over the last 6 years is it's really easy to plug tools in, like digital tools around yourself to help amplify your performance, right? Amplify your ability to focus and do what really matters most as a leader. But the truth is tools are only good so far. It's what I found. It's even more helpful to install a human individual who's really got your back, who's looking out for your blind spots, who's able to amplify what you really do well and help hedge against maybe what your liabilities could be as a leader, whether that's a personality characteristic or a skill deficit. And so that augmented approach, in my experience, between having a human component as your enablement, as part of your enablement layer, as well as technology, as well as really beyond your organization, as you've already alluded to, Bryon, having connection to other leaders that are trying to find their path to success and putting the right support around them. This chief of staff role, I think, is a huge lever to really help orchestrate that entire process. Because leaders, you're already dealing with a lot. You're already holding a lot. You're trying to move the world, right? And it really, if you're honest with yourself, you can't do it all. And so thinking about that executive layer, putting someone like a chief of staff, whether that's in a full-time capacity or a fractional or part-time or contracted capacity, it's a massive unlock for you because, technology can only see so much, can only do so much, but you put a human in some form of capacity and augment them with the right tools or help them, empower them to find the right tools. That's really the secret recipe, the secret sauce to really getting that layer, that executive enablement layer right for you to really help you go to that next level.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know you're super passionate about the chief of staff role, and as am I. I think that strategic support layer or executive enablement layer in a small to medium-sized business, I think is an absolute game changer. I had seen that so many times in the corporate world that when I started recognizing it in small to medium-sized businesses, I saw that it was infinitely more important to have a fantastic generalist that could be able to work through any kind of solution at the executive level. So, Phil, you've obviously invested heavily in the chief of staff role and that as a solution for executive enablement. Tell us a little bit about the Chief of Staff Roundtable and what you've been able to create.
I'd love to share, Bryon. So the Chief of Staff Roundtable, as I tell this story, didn't start out of some grand vision or ambition. It's really started as me trying to find my path to success as a new chief of staff. I helped leaders in a lot of different ways over the course of my career up until becoming a chief of staff. But I'd never, once I was installed in this position, I'd never really seen that side of leadership and that side of what it really takes to help a leader succeed. And so this role is typically a team of one. And because the leader I was supporting had never had a chief of staff before, both of us, I'd never been a chief of staff. He never had a chief of staff. The organization itself never had a chief of staff before. It was a blank slate on all fronts, or as I like to say, it was a straight up learning curve on all fronts to just define, like, what does this role mean for me and my career, for this leader and what he wants to see happen in the organization and for the organization. So I felt very isolated and alone and confused in figuring out this equation. And I distinctly remember, after being in this role for a year, treading water, trying to get my bearings on what this role means, digesting whatever I could on the internet about what this role entailed, I realized that this lone wolf approach to finding clarity, finding answers, finding confidence to really maximize what this role can do wasn't going to come from my own efforts on my own. And so I started just reaching out to folks in my growing chief of staff network through LinkedIn. And through that, it became apparent that I was not the only one having these challenges of finding, of navigating these demands of a very lonely role. And through that effort, we started a monthly call, and just to have an open line where folks could have a safe space to process their unique challenges as a chief of staff. And I just kept the line open. It was kind of my own little cohort for, the first year or so. And more folks started learning about this safe space to process their challenges, to find answers, to get clarity, to get confidence in their chief of staff journey. And that's really where this community started to take on a life of its own, really beyond what I needed from it. And it started to become a real resource for lots and lots of people all around the world that are interested in this profession and really wanting to go to that next level. And so what I've found Now 5 years later, or really 6 years later, but 5 years from our first roundtable, is that this role has grown. The chief of staff role has grown in popularity across the business world. It's been well established in some larger companies for several decades, but in terms of its proliferation, really, across all sizes of organizations, across industry, it's really been the last 10 years, really last 6 years, that it's really taken on. It's garnered a lot of interest. And to your point, Bryon, especially on the SMB front, growing organizations, founders who are trying to start something, trying to scale something, the challenges around those leaders are fundamentally different than leaders at a large enterprise organization. They're not, harder or more challenging. They're different. They're just different challenge sets. And so when you're thinking about the executive enablement function, around a leader in that context, you need somebody. If you're starting things from scratch, you're starting your HR function from scratch, you're starting your sales function, you need someone who can understand just enough of what's needed to materialize your vision, and they can really build the plane while you're trying to get it flown. And so that hyper generalists are highly capable generalists. Chiefs of staff are the sort of individuals that are attracted to roles like this, can really dig into anything and get it started and help bring the resources together to stabilize and make things stand up, long term. And so in my experience, chiefs of staff, individuals that are drawn to a role like this, typically have a track record of being able to jump into a mess and make something beautiful out of it on behalf of a leader, right? Because that's what's so cool about it. I love this community because, they're all about lifting others and helping others shine. And I mean, we need more of that in the world, don't we? And so that's why I'm so invested in this community, so invested in this role, because it really is changing the game for leaders in organizations.
It really is a commonality among great chiefs of staff, as they literally love to watch others succeed and to lift others up. And so that's kind of a common trait that's required to be great at that position. And you mentioned something that was interesting, because people talk about how the CEO is the loneliest role in an organization. I would actually argue that oftentimes it's the chief of staff, because everything and see everything that the CEO does, but you cannot say the wrong thing ever, because there's just, too many pitfalls. And so, one of the things we've done at Proxxy is kind of deconstructed and reimagined that role in a team setting. Mm-hmm. And so as we think about, there's different ways for CEOs and C-suite members of companies to get executive enablement and to install an executive enablement. So what are some of the things that a CEO should be thinking about in terms of defining the right solution for executive enablement? What's right for them, and how would you help somebody make that decision? Because oftentimes, we don't know what we don't know, or we don't know what we need. Like the example you gave of your first, chief of staff post, you were learning right along with the executives. Yeah. So how would you help some of those SMB CEOs out there who are trying to figure that out?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, first of all, I would say if the leader is asking that question of, I feel like I need support, but I don't really know what kind of support I need. That's a super honest question, and I love it. I mean, if you're asking that question, you are automatically you're in the good leader trajectory versus the bad leader trajectory. The first question I would ask them, and it's a pretty another honest question, is like, what really keeps you up at night when it comes to helping? When you have a vision about what you want to see happen. What really keeps you up tonight? Is it something related to your own personal effectiveness as a leader? Are you disorganized? Do you feel like you just can't keep track of all the initiatives and projects that you feel like are necessary to get you where you want to go? Is it something related to your team? Like you just can't manage the talent that you've pulled together, or and you need support there? And or is it just organizationally, like process wise, like you feel like, it's just a mess and there's miscommunication, misinformation, and this, some leaders may be like, what, it's really just my personal effectiveness. Like, I just feel like I just cannot keep all the balls going. I can't keep it all going, and I feel like I'm disorganized. I would say that's one challenge set that I think it's worth considering, and there's a certain support that fits best for that. If that challenge set expands out to the team of managing talent, of managing projects with different stakeholders, well, then that spans out. That requires a certain level of support to really help you manage that talent. But if it extends beyond that to the organization, just the whole thing, keeping the whole thing moving, then that you need there are certain roles that impact that issue. I would say a chief of staff. It really depends on at what stage you are in your organization. So if you're a founder and you're just getting started, likelihood is that you just need someone keeping your world in order, like keeping you focused on the things that'll really move the needle. And so you need to take that into consideration. You may not need a chief of staff, like, because in my perspective and my work with folks in this role, chiefs of staff, an executive assistant is really best at managing that first layer. So when you think about your personal efficiency and effectiveness as a leader, your inbox, your calendar, your meeting preparation, your, just keeping track of things, executive assistants are absolutely dynamite in handling that challenge set. That is what they're positioned to do. Only they can do that. That is not a chief of staff's job. Like a chief of staff's real value proposition is really that. Obviously, they can do that work, but it's really extending into that second layer, like managing talent, managing projects, lots of projects, keeping you focused, but really being a true extension of you with your team and beyond your team in the organization. So that's a long answer. In summary, take a hard look. What keeps you up at night? Is it your personal effectiveness and focus? Is it you're not getting the most out of your team? There's a talent management issue. Or is there just overall organizational kind of entropy? Like you're just not, there's a lack of momentum and you just feel like it's all kind of coming apart at the seams, and you just need someone to help pull it all together and streamline it in a more efficient and effective way. If that's the case, chief of staff is definitely what you should consider because of how much visibility they would have across those three layers and their ability to really, if they're empowered, right, their ability to pull the resources together to solve challenges across those three layers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I love your point about the fact that any CEO who says, hey, something's not right, and I'm going to look for a solution and be open and honest about it, that puts them in the category of great leader. You're totally right about that. The thing that I would also point out is some individuals are like, we get a lot of people who will reach out to Proxxy talking about pace. Not that things are broken, not that, like they are not efficient, but they just want to move faster. They want to achieve more. And then I think where that moves beyond the individual is in what I would refer to as management metabolism. How fast the rest of the organization can absorb what an executive is thinking, wanting to get done, wanting to achieve. So yeah, I think those are all good things for self-discovery. And I think your point about there's different degrees of need. Executive enablement in the very early stages could simply mean if I use Microsoft, I'm going to start using Copilot. And that requires me to do some thinking. So that's the premium, right? Is that I don't have that kind of time. So that's where an executive admin may be a really, really nice solution in the early stage. The other thing that I would point out for executives who are thinking about this role and this need for executive enablement is how sustainable and consistent it can be. So the challenge that you run into with chiefs of staff or individuals is assuming the executive knows how to use them.
Mm-hmm.
What
Big
happens when
assumption
that
too.
person's really good, right?
Yeah.
It's so natural that they go up or out. And then the executive has to start all over again.
All over again. Yep.
Yeah, and that's the challenge. We try and solve that in Proxxy with a team approach.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
But how have you seen executives prepare for that and try and keep some consistency with the chief of staff that they hire or the executive assistant that they hire? How do they protect against that?
I don't have good news. I don't think many leaders don't even, it's not on the radar. Oftentimes it's in my work with chiefs of staff, we advise our members in the roundtable, they need to think about that. They need to think about they need to think about their exit strategy, because and that opens up a whole bigger conversation around the leader, just succession planning in general. Because chief of staff exits, if they don't have a general strategy on how they replace talent, then I think it doesn't really matter if you backfill a chief of staff. If you can't backfill a CMO or a CRO, then you got a problem. Chiefs of staff, that's a great initiative for a chief of staff to tackle. But to answer your question more directly, I would say that leaders need to think about, they're not prepared for it. So that's the first point I want to make. And so there's an obvious opportunity there for chiefs of staff, if you have one or if you don't have one, to really give some thought and attention to just figuring out how are you going to transfer all of the knowledge and experience and kind of equity that you have in an individual like this in a way that's not a liability, right? And what I love about Proxxy's approach is that team-based approach, because if you're putting all of your eggs into one individual, then that is a horrible risk strategy. Because if they get hit by a bus tomorrow, it's just, you've lost so much. And we don't want them to get hit by a bus, but you get what I'm saying. Whereas if you have a
We
team-based
prefer to
approach,
say hit by the lottery.
hit by the lottery, that's a better way to, hit by the lottery. You need a way to ensure the information that they have. There's continuity between what they know, what they've been able to do, the things they've been able to set up. And so when you have a team-based approach to the role, which is exactly what Proxxy does, it helps install that, it de-risks that investment. And that's the challenge, in a larger organization where you have this chief of staff role, typically there's an office of the CEO in place. They usually use this role as a tour of duty so that it's a talent management or leadership development mechanism. That's what we're talking about. Where Proxxy's focuses on SMB leaders, there's one person and maybe an EA. And so the ability to install a system to where there's continuity, no matter who's in that seat, there's a way to store that knowledge and store it, that's really the Proxxy secret sauce. I think it's really compelling. And a game changer when you think about just the challenges you're trying to solve at this stage of your organization.
Yeah, in larger organizations where the chief of staff, there is an office of the CEO or the chief of staff has other resources, what I find really, really valuable is their ability to capture those details and think in those terms where, in a smaller company, your hair is on fire all the time, right? I mean, you're moving fast and you've got another idea and there's an opportunity in the marketplace you got to take advantage of. And you can't just wait around and hope for the best, so, and document everything.
No.
What I do think is really interesting about that chief of staff role, or what we try and do in Proxxy, is we do it with our staffing model and the way that we put teams together around the executive, but even the chief of staff, even the executive assistant can capture what they do. And you have to allow them to have that kind of time and make that, I think you said it perfectly, that's a great project, right? I mean, to think about how you transfer knowledge, how you transfer roles, how you transfer effectiveness. And so speaking of effectiveness, I'd love to get your feel for how do you measure the impact of executive enablement? And how do you see chiefs of staff doing that?
Wow, that's a big question, and I will say,
I know
honestly,
you're the only guy that can answer it. That's why I threw it at you.
well, you know what? I'm the only guy who can probably give a read on how that question is being answered, or how it's attempted to be. And the inherent challenge for individuals, I'll take it from two different angles. One challenge for individuals that are enrolled in executive enablement roles, when they think about this role as it relates to their career and where they want to go, is like, how do I measure my performance when I don't have direct ownership over the success of a function? Like, I'm not the head of this where there's a direct line to the P&L, right? It's like, how do I, understand that? And the biggest thing that I coach folks to do is to realize, when a leader sets an objective, like that they want to achieve this revenue or achieve this level of market awareness or whatever, there are, whatever the goal is, wherever the starting point is, there are a series of activities, things that have to happen to make that goal a reality. And that is exactly the work that you do. Like, you are the throughput for a leader's desired output. And so when I think about measuring success and effectiveness of this executive enablement layer, it really comes down to, obviously, the outcome. Like, did we achieve our goals? Well, then that begs the question, well, okay, just because we achieved our goals doesn't mean that this individual had, a significant role to play. At least that's maybe the assumption. I would ask the question, if you're the leader who has these roles around you, do you have more hair on your head if you achieve the goal? Like, if you have more hair in your head, then that means your executive enablement layer probably did a really good job in helping ensure that outcome. If you're more stressed out, if you didn't sleep as much, if if your team is not working as well together, if, fill in the blank, then that's how you'll know if that executive enablement layer is really doing their job well. And that's when, if you're in those roles, ask your leader, like, hey, like, how, typically it's midstream. You probably want to, in the performance review process or those conversations, like, do you feel less stressed? Do you feel like you have more time? Do you feel like you're able to focus more on the stuff only you can move? And if they can't answer those questions like very quickly, then that you need to move faster, or you need to, like, that is typical. That's the slot you're in. And so that's how I would answer that question. Is there's the goal and the objective, there's starting point, the goal, there's that throughput, which is all the stuff that has to happen to make it happen. Identify what levers are you pulling directly to influence those outcomes. And you can claim ownership over that, like that you started this initiative, or you framed up this brief that led to that. And so don't give yourself credit for the actual stuff that really moved the needle towards that outcome, because that you may not be in a role where you set those targets. That's what leaders do. Only leaders can set those targets. But if you're in this executive enablement role, whether it's an EA or a chief of staff or a special projects manager, or fill in the blank, whatever the role is, that that your contributions have a direct result on those outcomes. But the way you're going to know that your effort was that the only way the leader is really going to know is if are they more stressed out, focus, time, attention, like, did they have to do more work to get to that outcome, or did they have to do less? So that's kind of a smattering of ways to know, but that really underscores the emphasis that Proxxy is focused on. It's like, installing a layer. So you're installing a layer around an SMB leader, but then you're installing a team around that individual to help them do their best work on behalf of the leader, so that the leader can focus on what matters most.
Yeah, I think what's really compelling about what you just said there is it's communication, right? Yeah. You have to be able to speak to that individual and identify what matters to them most. Mm-hmm. And so maybe it's hair loss, maybe it's, the gray hair. But what I would also say is, if you find something that feels tangible to both you, the executive enablement solution, and the executive, that's fine. it's a way to open communication. So like at Proxxy in the early stages, when we work with clients, we track how much time we recovered.
Yeah.
And we say to the executive, did you feel that? And that's a great way for us every week just to keep ourselves honest and keep checking in on is the work that I'm doing making an impact on the individual, and are they feeling that? And so that may feel soft, but in the early stages for anybody that's in this role, and that's a great point that the executive should also be proactively communicating that. Right. We think so much about it from our side because we're the ones that do the executive enablement. But that's a great piece of advice for executives to be able to start thinking, I should be able to communicate what I need and how it feels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this you mentioned the soft point, how it feels like, some may bristle at that. It doesn't matter. Just we got to get. But like, listen, like if you're not feeling better about your role and your impact and performance, that kind of matters. So it may not be the whole picture, the key variable you need to consider, but it definitely needs to be a part of the equation.
So Phil, any parting thoughts on what executives should be or can be thinking about in terms of executive enablement? Anything that any wisdom you'd like to bestow based on all the people who you talked to that have been doing it for executives?
Totally. Yeah. I think where I started, be honest with yourself. Because if you can't be honest with yourself about what you really need to solve the issues that keep you up at night as a leader, the truth is, if you're not solving those issues, your team is seeing it, your family's seeing it. And so don't shoot yourself in the foot and not take some sort of action to put the right support around you, because you're only one person and you only can do so much. And also, what about the opportunity you're providing those that are in roles like this for their career to learn what leadership looks like? I mean, that's probably the biggest unlock for the biggest opportunity, other than the success of obviously your legacy as a leader and what you're able to achieve, is the ability to give other people paths to possible leadership one day, to give them opportunity to see that and have a front row seat, hopefully, of what good leadership looks like, so that they believe that that's a worthy path to support if they want to stay in a supportive role, like an enablement role, or if they want to be a leader one day, to know what that path looks like. Be honest with yourself about what you need and reach out to Proxxy to figure out what your next steps could be. If you're an SMB leader and you're really curious about this chief of staff solution or executive enablement solution, that's really the best answer.
Well, and I'll give you a plug as well. If I had a chief of staff, the first place I would send them would be the Chief of Staff Roundtable, where they can open up, they can talk about what they're experiencing, they can get great tools that are available to them that have been built by the people in the role. So I just love the fact that you guys don't pontificate from on high and and just tell the world like this is the way it is. I love that you do it as a true round table, and there's a collective approach to how you create these solutions, and it's from a practitioner's perspective. So
that's right.
The bottom line is there's lots of solutions out there. So
there is.
I would highly recommend people reach out to Phil if you have a chief of staff, or if you want to explore the chief of staff. And of course, Proxxy is always here to help any of the executives in small to medium-sized businesses that are growing fast. Thanks for being here, Phil. We appreciate your time on the Leaders List.
Thanks, Bryon, for having me. It was fun.